Before you can declare that a model is appropriate, you need to consider residuals. Here's a scatter plot where down on this axis we have the number of motorboats registered in thousands in Tallahassee, Florida, and on the y-axis we have the number of manatee deaths. Unfortunately, motorboats can kill manatees by running over them because manatees float on the surface. So if we're going to build a model through these data points, then we have to consider residuals before we can declare that this model is appropriate. Residual is equal to the actual y minus the predicted y. So here's an actual data point and consider its y value. So directly below it, the predicted y value would be a little bit lower, and actual minus predicted gives us that error. So when we're talking about residuals, we're talking about errors. When the data point is above the model, then we have a positive residual, and when the data point down here is below the model, then we have a negative residual. Down here we have the residual plot. Notice there is a one-to-one correspondence between every point on the scatter plot and a point directly below it on the residual plot. So this point corresponds to this residual, and the same here. We want to make sure that there is no clear pattern to the residual. If there is a clear pattern to the residual, and we'll show examples of what that means in a moment, then we would conclude that it's an inappropriate model. If there's a clear pattern to the errors, then we've missed something. If there's no clear pattern to the residuals, it's an appropriate model. However, if the residuals or errors are large, then it's an appropriate model, but perhaps not very useful. And if we have no clear pattern of the residuals and small residuals, then we can conclude it's an appropriate model. There are many different kinds of patterns that could happen. Three relatively common ones is that the residuals could have a concave up or concave down pattern, increasing or decreasing pattern, or they could be too high or too low. So here's a residual plot down here, and when you're looking for residuals, you look up top to see the size of the residuals or magnitude of the residuals, and down below for the pattern of the residuals. So we can see that there is a clear concave down pattern of the residuals, but up here the dots are close to the line, so they're small residuals. It's not an appropriate model. Here we have no clear pattern to the residuals, and the residuals are fairly large, so it's appropriate but perhaps not very useful. Here we have no clear pattern to the residuals and small residuals, therefore it's a very appropriate model. In this case, we have a clear decreasing pattern to the residuals. The residuals are small, but it's not an appropriate model. Or here, the residuals are too low. That could be fixed, but the residuals here are too low. We have small residuals, so this is not yet an appropriate model. And that'll give you some idea of what residuals are all about.